You are listening to the ERP, Organizational Change Journal, a podcast brought to you by Nestle and Associates.
Brent, I have a couple more articles that I'd like to share with our listeners from your website. And one of those is called Whole Brain HCM, Knocking Down Software Silos and Solving for Industries. And in there, you mentioned that, quote, there's a domain of C-suites fixated on orderliness, efficiencies, productivity, and mathematical measurement. And then there's a domain galvanized by people, creativity, inspiration, and emotionality. The first is the C-suite's left brain. The other is its right brain. For organizational success, the economics of our day demand all of these preoccupations. And then the article goes on to say, just 2 years ago, Accenture decided to give this idea a name, whole brain leadership, and these companies perform better financially. Can you tell us more about this idea in the context of HCM and positive organizational change?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics. And yes, it's now over 3 years ago, I think, that Accenture came out with the idea of whole brain leadership. But it was really interesting because myself sort of establishing this idea at 360 Insights around the idea of abstract HCM and concrete HCM, it was very illuminating and intriguing for me to learn later that Accenture had come up with this idea of whole brain leadership, because there is a common thread here. You know, when you want to talk about, talking about the C-suite, right? Again, you have the left-brained people and the right-brained people in the C-suite. I even learned that left brain and right brain is actually a theory that's been a little bit discounted, apparently, in brain science, but it's still useful in terms of explaining things. You have the more concrete, mathematically inclined. You have the more abstract people, creatively inclined. And then you have sort of the CEO, whose job is to synthesize those two camps' ideas into something that resembles a good direction for the organization, right? Well, if you think about it from just the standpoint of HR or HCM, sometimes I use the terms HCM and HR interchangeably, even though technically they're not. But you think about the silos of HCM, right? There are very concrete, left-brained activities involved, and then there are very right-brained, creative, abstract activities involved. And when we think about HCM as being divided into sort of the traditional silos, especially in talent management, performance management, succession planning, compensation management, and then talent acquisition, we think about it as recruiting and then onboarding, all of these discrete, separate processes. I think it tends to further calcify, let's put it that way, this thinking of the more concrete side of HCM. So if we think about knocking down the silos in HCM and realizing that, talent acquisition all the way through performance management and learning, it all blends and it all takes place sort of as a dance as opposed to a linear progression of things, then we can start to break free of the concreteness of being relegated just to concreteness in HCM, and we can start to think about how it interrelates and how it affects the employee's sentiment, their experience, and their willingness to stay with the organization. So that's really what I was getting at there. And if you want to go back to the leadership piece of that, right? HR department needs to take on a whole brain leadership approach to HCM, and that really is organizational, right? Because when you're talking about performance reviews or these sorts of things, those are line managers doing those. If you're approaching this stuff from a very linear sort of siloed perspective, then maybe you're doing just an annual performance review. Everybody hates the process, and nothing really comes of it much good, right? But if you think about it more as an integrated thing where it involves conversations, a regular cadence of conversations as opposed to assessments over the course of a year, then it's pretty difficult to do that in a vacuum. You're talking about goals, you're talking about learning, you're talking about your employees' career aspirations on a regular basis. And so already you're talking about succession planning, compensation management, and all these other things in the same breath. And so that's what's going on there when you're looking at it, when you're approaching HCM as a whole whole HCM as opposed to siloed.
Yeah, great explanation, Brent. And really, the key is, I would say, is bridging that gap between that which is more concrete and more visible. So maybe that's in terms of productivity and mathematical measurement versus that which is more abstract. Maybe a little hard to recognize, which is people's creativity, inspiration, and emotional well-being. I would say.
If I may add there super
Yeah.
quickly, it's really interesting because I like to put it this way. You can't really capture that stuff in a conventional accounting spreadsheet, right? Because it needs to be
Yeah.
an actual number, right? But I
Yeah.
like to say this: try to argue against employee satisfaction, creativity, their ability to think about something other than a rote process. Try to argue that that's not good for the organization. The reason it doesn't translate to an accounting spreadsheet is because we don't know the exact number it's going to be, but it's pretty much a given that there's going to be an uptick in revenue, an uptick in profitability, and an uptick in retention of top talent, all these sorts of things, which in the end are important.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, Brent, I would argue that based on some pretty sound research, that those companies that rate high in those areas, and there's certainly different ways to measure these ideas of this more abstract things, right? Values and teamwork and vision and those ideas. You can certainly take those ideas, which are abstract, and make them more concrete so that you can have productive conversations. One of the tools we use is the Denison model.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically an organizational culture survey that helps you, take the temperature of the culture on some of these ideas, some of these abstract notions, I would say. But absolutely, there is a correlation between high performing organizations and how well they perceive some of these abstract ideas in terms of the ability to be creative, the ability to be innovative, the ability to be inspirational. So it's a pretty crucial idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I could remember the name of it exactly, but Great Place to Work, which was acquired by UKG, I believe, about a year and a half ago now. They came up with a measurement that actually it's the innovation something. I don't have time to look for it at the moment, so I'm mangling what it is. But it's this idea. It's this idea that organizations where more people feel like they're heard and that they're not mired by administrative paperwork or red tape and these sorts of things, all these sorts of things that are reflective of old ways of thinking and old processes. Those organizations experience more innovation. And of course, innovation is the origins of competitive advantage.